What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Fringe. Things are heating up in Alberta Independence. In fact, I think the mother of all, the OMAB, as they call it, has been dropped when it comes to what Albertans can expect in terms of the information that they're going to get. Now, I've told you that this channel is the unofficial channel for all things Alberta Prosperity. However, a new document has surfaced that we need to talk about because it's not really new, sort of new, the new, if you will. I've been talking about this for a long time. The final draft of the prosperous, I want to make sure I'm quoting this properly. The value of freedom is coming out shortly. Now, I was supposed to have Jeffrey Rath on the channel very soon. In fact, I was supposed to have him on last week talking about this document. Again, I have the last draft of the document, and I can tell you that I'm anxious to see what has been amended in this plan. But you can see over here on the side, combined with provincial revenues of $74.1 billion in an Alberta pension plan generating $23.34 billion annually from $183.7 billion asset base, total revenues reach $142.1 to $149.1 billion. Expenditures including $75.3 billion for provincial services, $22.7 to $31 billion to replace federal services, e.g., defense, policing, indigenous services, total $98 to $169 billion, with a one-time setup cost of $2.8 to $5.7 billion. The results in a fiscal surplus of $29.4 to $48.3 billion, excluding setup, or $23.6 to $45.5 billion, including setup, enabling significant tax reductions, infrastructure investment, and debt reductions. It goes on to say tax reductions could include eliminating GST, provincial personal corporate tax incomes, and whatnot, as it goes on. Now, I don't want to dictate too much out of this, because Jeffrey Rath has said that a planned press release will be coming today, later today. And then again, I'll have him on the channel. I will be going over this document, the benefits of this document with you, the viewers. But this is good. This is the one thing I've been saying is the most important thing when it comes to Alberta Prosperity, Alberta Independence, because people want to see the proof in the pudding. They want to see how would this work if Canadians in Alberta decided enough was enough and we just want to remain Alberta. We want to be independent. What does that mean for us? How much money do we stand to gain? What does the big picture look like? What does our budget look like? How do we manage? How do we move forward? Now, keep in mind, one of the best comments on here is, while I'm glad that you and others have started early drafts, it's really not a final draft until Albertans decide it is. This is a starting point for Albertans to work from. Jeffrey Rath commenting, that's the point. And that's what I like here, is that Alberta Prosperity Project has never once said that they're interested in taking control. They're merely trying to get Albertans to vote yes. They're trying to show the potential for what Alberta could become. As Jeffrey Rath says, he's not interested in becoming Yertle the Turtle to dictate who needs to go where and do what. They simply want to vote. When you start to show numbers, when you show actual figures, and again, these are not pie-in-the-sky numbers. These numbers are coming from actual federal data and provincial data that exists out in the world, that is public knowledge. This is just the money that could come from what a yes vote endures. Forget about companies moving here, low income tax. Again, there's a plan in here, at least in the first draft that I had, outlining that within 5 years, essentially, Albertans would pay zero income tax once we pay down debts. Kind of back to the days of Ralph Klein's debt-free. This is huge. If you can convince Albertans with accurate statistics, it becomes a very easy question. Politics aside, it's the one common question that I commonly ask people whenever the trolls are in the comments saying, you can't leave, you can't take the oil, nothing's going to happen. I always say, look, go read the Clarity Act, go look at everything. However, if I lit a $100 bill on fire and threw it on the ground and walked away, are you going to put it out, or are you just going to let it burn? 99.999% of the people would put it out. That's what we're talking about here. No politics. Look at your life. Look at your day-to-day life. Is it difficult? Are you fed up with paying erroneous levels of taxes? Are you fed up with the government telling you to shut up and keep paying? Are you fed up being told, hey, think about whether or not you want to turn on your air conditioning when you're boiling in your house over the summer, or think about whether or not you want to turn on your heating and avoiding your pipes freezing in the winter because it's so expensive to run your home? Go work at your job that pays you next to nothing in contrast to what the cost of living is. Think about all the taxes that you pay out. When you go to the gas pump, and a vast majority of what you pay is tax. And I'm not talking carbon tax. I'm talking federal taxes, all these different taxes, transfer taxes that all go into the fuel cost, all to be shipped to a province like Quebec that tells you it's not socially acceptable for you to live your life based on what your major export is in your province. These statistics are going to matter. What's also going to matter today, and one thing that I want to touch on because this kind of weighs hand in hand, I had Cam Davies on the channel. Now, this is a CBC article, and many people are going to say, Fringe, why are you covering the CBC? Well, because it just shows, again, more argument for Alberta Independence. Keep in mind, we wouldn't have to pay for the CBC anymore, folks. I think that's a win in itself. But I've told you that the interference is going to come. Now, I've said when I interviewed Cam Davies that my bias had shifted, and that was the bias that essentially they were here to split the vote, that they were the PPC. However, after speaking with Cam, it's not to say that I would vote for Cam Davies. I stand behind Danielle Smith as of now. However, I do believe that a competent, like-minded party in the Alberta legislature as opposition, a balanced opposition that actually brings good points to the table, could be beneficial to get the UCP, to get other parties to really focus on the things that matter, to maybe take a bolder stance, to be held to account anytime they drop. Because again, I've called out Danielle Smith on this channel for things she's done that I don't agree with, but it would be good to have somebody else other than the NDP in the Alberta legislature virtue signaling their way to the next win, which I don't think is coming. I don't think Nenshi has a hope in hell. However, a lot of eyes, including the CBCs, are on what happens with Cam Davies in his by-election today. It'll be very interesting. Do I think Naheed Nenshi is going to get his seat? Yes, I do believe he'll win his seat. He's running in a relatively safe riding. I guess nothing's over till it's over. But I want to focus on CBC because I've talked about interference. I've talked about how others are coming in now saying Alberta can't leave. We're just not going to allow it. The government's going to interfere. All these things are going to happen. They're not going to acknowledge Alberta, on a yes vote. None of that's relevant. Again, go read the Clarity Act. But what we're seeing here is the words. You got to watch the words that CBC is using because this is why I wanted to highlight this. How voters in rural conservative heartland wrestle with Alberta separatism. There's no, hey, you have a dysfunctional relationship with your government. Hey, we got to watch how we're running things around here, because there's mistrust. There's 10 years of abuse. There's multiple decades of Alberta being snubbed. The words here are going to matter, but all eyes are on Cam Davies' win. The reason I think it's important for somebody like Cam Davies to win this seat today is because it sets a precedency that the world, or the country in particular, needs to take Alberta serious. That separatism or independence, as I like to call it, separatism as the CBC labels it, actually has a voice in this province, that it's growing. It's no longer a fringe topic. No pun intended. Cam Davies asked the audience in Three Hills Community Hall for a show of hands who believes Alberta should give Prime Minister Mark Carney a chance to provide for their province. Among approximately 150 people at this pro-independence event, one hand went up. There's always one, remarked Cam Davies, leader of the Republican Party of Alberta, to scattered laughter. The event in the central Alberta town of about 3,000 was pitched as a lecture series on the upsides of Alberta separation. Again, I have to read what they're saying, but I prefer independence. doubled as a campaign rally for Cam Davies running in the upcoming provincial by-election in Olds, Didsbury, and Three Hills, electing a separatist here. Attendees were told would send a message to the federal and provincial governments. I agree with that end. Gord Kessler was there to testify that he'd grabbed headlines 43 years ago for winning a provincial seat for another separatist party during another stretch of heated anti-Ottawa mood. I'd love to brand you all freedom warriors, Kessler said, asking for many in the crowd who would vote for Davies. Most hands went up, but some noticeably stayed down. Part of that may reflect geographical reality. Some in the hall, including a local separatist and the town mayor, said they only recognized around 1/4 or fewer of the audience as Three Hills residents. Several attendees visited from an hour's drive or more away, places like Calgary, Ponoka County, or Westlock. Three Hills resident Mike Litke and his partner paid $20 each for Republican ball caps, his in camouflage, hers in tan, and believe Alberta would be freer and better off if the province became its own republic. So again, they're labeling this as a fringe minority. Oh, look, these guys are paying money for hats. They're part of this. They're coming from outside, folks. It's not being supported. This is why, again, I think it's critical for Cam to win that seat. Not because necessarily I endorse or agree with what Cam had to say on the channel or that I trust Cam Davies, but it's the message that it sends, if that makes sense. I hope it makes sense, because it seems like anytime I try to say these things, people misunderstand what I'm saying and think that I'm against the system. It says that they had traveled elsewhere before the separatist gatherings, but this was their first in their hometown, almost the first time they've heard the topic come up in Three Hills. I haven't heard separation mentioned in this town at all, Litke said. But if you talk to people in and around Three Hills, they've thought plenty about Alberta's place within Canada. You will hear how they hold out for hope for a better deal and a pipeline or two. I love that they put that in brackets from Mark Carney, and how that big option will to leave will wind up being more tempting if nothing changes. So while the CBC is very biased, I do agree that, look, a pipeline I don't think is going to fix the problem at this point. I think the problem is, well, a little more complex than that, and let's get into that. Now, good friend of the channel, CB Fixes All, had to say where some of the disdain comes from Alberta. Let's make that a little bit bigger for you guys so you guys can see it better. What's fair about this BS? Nothing at all. Alberta needs to leave. These are our Senate seats. These are the Senate seats across Canada. This is beyond pipelines. It's about what is paid out versus what comes back. Representation. Here's the question. How is it that 12 million people in the West have less representation than the 2.5 million in the Maritimes? So down here, you've got New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and PEI. This little speckle of land with 24 Senate seats. That's all the seats combined between BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Why do they have that control? Why do they have that kind of representation? When you add Newfoundland into the equation, the Maritimes have more seats than these four provinces. That's a big deal. Ontario, of course, has 24. Quebec has 24. Half and half. Fair representation for them. But this is the problem in our country. It's not just about pipelines. It's not just about oil and gas. This is about unfair treatment. This is about a country that doesn't care about these yellow provinces. They don't care what happens to these guys. Mark Carney, I believe, and if I was a betting man, if he was to put in any kind of line, it would be from Alberta through Manitoba to Churchill, from what Wob Canoe's talking about. We know David Eby, crazy David Eby, isn't going to allow anything in British Columbia. And people are going to say, well, Fringe, what about Bill C-5? I still don't think it's going to go through BC. If I'm proven wrong, fair enough. But I think the most probable outlook for any kind of a pipeline being built will not be south. It will not be north. It'll be as far east as Manitoba going into Churchill. And I think that's all we're going to get. And while people say, well, hey, that's a win, I don't think it's enough. to settle the disdain in Alberta, the pushback from its people. A lot of people are criticizing Danielle Smith. And when I say a lot of people, I'm not talking about myself. Take that very clearly. But a lot of people are saying, hey, including Cam Davies, Danielle had the right to go and call a referendum. She didn't have to take signatures. She didn't have to allow all this nonsense stalling. There's a lot of people starting to get disdain for Danielle Smith, and it starts to become a 50-50 split. Again, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Cam Davies' riding if that message holds true, and if that party would continue to gain some form of momentum if they win the by-election. While I agree that Danielle Smith is probably our best option moving forward, if there's anything I've learned, and it's something I talked about on Friday Night Fringe on our last live stream, again, you should join us in those streams if you haven't already, is that the time I've spent around politicians, the times I've spent around those who are influential, I'm talking important business people, people with stock options in this province, those with influence. What you think you know about a politician is just the tip of the iceberg. That what goes on behind closed doors is something not even I partake in or see. I sincerely hope that Danielle Smith continues to fight and advocate for the best interests of Albertans. But when people ask the questions, well, why isn't Danielle just calling a referendum? Well, if I was strategic and actually looking at the political spectrum, I could tell you it's because it would shoot herself in the foot. We've discussed that many times on the channel. But the problem is that when you start to wrap up conspiracies of, well, she's not signing this off, she's not pushing this in this direction, she's hoping for this to collapse, the problem you're going to find, and this is where it's a kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, is that while it's important for guys like Cam Davies to win their seat for Alberta independence, for the movement of Alberta independence, to change the tone of Alberta independence, it's also a double-edged sword because now it's going to start a 50-50 split between him and Danielle Smith over why is she not doing enough when somebody like Cam Davies could do more. So really, it's anybody's guess where things go from here. But I think, again, that document from the APP is going to help. I think that that is going to really paint a picture for Albertans that are on the fence, that are questioning what happens to our old age security, what happens to pension plans, what money will be doled out where, what do we save from the federal government. Once you start putting figures on paper, it starts becoming a little more clear as to what's best. And that's why I want to take it off of what we were just discussing with Danielle, Cam Davies, focus on the citizen-led initiative. We just need to get to the vote, folks. The numbers is what we should be concerned with. It'll be interesting to see where things lie. And again, I want to clearly state, because so many people like to point it out in the comments, I stand with Danielle Smith. I hope that's very clear for people. However, we still have to discuss what's going on in the background. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do you think this document's going to do wonderful things for Alberta? Do you think it's going to give a little more clarity when it comes to independence? Do you think Cam Davies might win his seat in this by-election? And if he does, what do you think that's going to lead to? Let me know your thoughts down below in the below the video. Tune in tomorrow. When it comes to Alberta independence, I'll also be sitting down with the Honorable Preston Manning, talk about his vision for what Alberta should be doing moving forward, or at least the way he sees the big picture, especially when it's so critical to a guy who once said the West wants in when he could have said the West wants out. Looking forward to that conversation. Join me live here on the channel each and every Friday for Friday Night Fringe, our live streaming weekly show, where I'm joined by the beautiful Mrs. Fringe as we talk about everything that happened this week in politics, everything we know that's coming up ahead in politics, as well as your Q&A back and forth within the greatest YouTube community on the platform. I always look forward to chatting with you guys outside of making these videos, but I most importantly look forward to hearing what you have to say this Friday night, starting at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, here on the channel. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll catch you on the next one.